Hey, what's up everybody? Welcome to Pat's Mythos. My name is Pat. Today's video, I'm going to be doing my very first series review here on the channel. This will be a spoiler-free series review for the Books of Babel by Josiah Bancroft. This is a fantasy quartet. I actually just finished it the other day, and I had a lot of thoughts about it, and I thought it would be a good opportunity to make a video, give my thoughts, and let other readers know if maybe the series could be for them or if it's something they should pass on. So in case you're not familiar with the series, The Books of Babel, I wanted to begin by giving a quick synopsis of what the series is about. The story follows our main character, Thomas Senlin, and his wife, Maria, as they come to basically what's considered the great wonder of their world, the world called Ur. And in this world, the great wonder is the place called the Tower of Babel. And this tower is sort of like supposed to be the pinnacle of civilization. It's a miles-high tower with all these different ringdoms on different floors, which are basically like cities, and they're all very different. And Thomas is under the impression when he's coming that he's going to find this amazing place that is so different from the seaside town he lives on the other side of the country. So him and his wife make the trip to the Tower of Babel for their honeymoon. And not long after arriving, Thomas loses Maria, his wife. And basically the story follows Thomas as he tries to track her down and reunite, because he soon finds out that the Tower of Babel is not necessarily what it seems, and it's very difficult to find somebody after they're lost. I think that's a pretty solid synopsis of what the series is about. It takes place over 4 books. As I mentioned, it's a quartet. Those books are Senlin Ascends, The Arm of the Sphinx, The Hod King, and then The Fall of Babel. I want to provide a little bit of my background on how I learned about the series. I think the very first place I heard about it was from Alan at the Library of Alexandria. He was one of the first really big advocates for the series on BookTube. And he kind of sold the same premise about it. I didn't really learn all that much more than what I just said before I began. I really wasn't sure what Josiah Bancroft's style was like, or sort of what the tone of the series was. And so I kind of went in fairly blind. Other than that synopsis I gave you, I really didn't know what else to expect. I just love the idea of this tower and the premise of trying to find your loved one. And it just sounded like a unique story or setting, something different from what I'm usually reading with these big epic fantasy stories. So I thought it would be worth a try. So as I mentioned, I just recently finished, and I'd like to begin by telling you the things that I really liked about this series. So first of all, as I mentioned, this is a really unique setting. The Tower of Babel is unlike anything I've ever read in fantasy. It really kind of serves as the main setting for this story. There is not a lot of time spent outside of it. And so you get to see a lot of these different ringdoms, as I mentioned, different floors that sort of serve as cities that all have different histories and cultures and unique, weird characters. And it's just a joy getting to experience all such a varying types of places all within a single place. And yeah, it was definitely a unique setting and was a breath of fresh air to start my journey here. And so with the tower, it is very steampunk-ish. And I've never read any steampunk ever. I don't think I've ever really consumed any steampunk media whatsoever. And I found that I actually really was into it. It was kind of cool. There are airships. There are cool, literally steam-powered inventions and these really cool things that, things that you don't see in normal sword and sorcery fantasy, but were really fun and new to me. And so if you're into steampunk, I definitely think this could be something that interests you. Another thing I really enjoyed about the series was Bancroft's writing and storytelling style. It's got a very whimsical, kind of flowery approach to his writing that really suits the kind of wackiness of the world, which I'll get into a little bit more about how wacky this world is. But just to start, I want to say that his writing style is very well done. It's very fresh and unique. There's sort of like a funny, sarcastic feel to a lot of the things, a lot of satire here, which again, I'll get into more. But overall, I just love his style. And as bonus points to this, I did do the entire series on audio. And the narrator, whose name I'm blanking on right now, was just the perfect narrator to execute Bancroft's style. He had that sort of whimsical, flowery feel to the way he spoke and the way he applied the voice to the characters. It was just perfect. And so I'll just say right now, if you do end up deciding to try the series, I highly recommend it as an audio listen or read. And the next thing, and one of the biggest things you need to know about the series and may decide whether you like it or not, is just how strange, offbeat, and weird everything really is in these stories. And it's not going to work for everybody. Thankfully for me, I found everything very charming despite being very weird. I thought the zany, whimsical, offbeat feel, it worked for me. It's not going to work for everybody. It really sort of almost feels like a Discworld, maybe even a little more goofy than Discworld. I always sort of felt like it felt like a cartoon in my head. Some of the action and the humor is very cartoonish and zany. Also, sometimes like a Monty Python feel to the humor. And the humor is great. I actually think that this is probably the funniest series I've read. There were a couple moments that genuinely made me chuckle and laugh, which I really don't do very often in any book or series. But this one, it was just different. The way the humor is executed was just awesome. And that zany and offbeat feeling definitely lends itself to some more satirical portions. If you like satire, this could be something for you. There is probably most satirical poking fun at class, looking at the haves and the have-nots of the tower, the way that the Hods, as they're called, sort of like the slaves and servants of the tower, live their lives in comparison to the rich and kind of elite class of the tower. These are probably the thematic depth you would get from the series. Probably not the most deep series in terms of themes, but in my opinion, it's not a series you should really come to for that. It's an added bonus that these satirical portions do give it a little bit of depth as well. And the last thing I'd like to talk about as something I really liked about this series is that it's relatively low stakes and not a super huge commitment overall. It's not going to be your epic fantasy with gods and giant wars and armies and empires. It's really, a little bit micro focused on the happenings of this one tower. You could almost imagine it as like one city or city state civilization, as opposed to following, several big empires fighting each other. This is a little different. We're shrinking things down. We're not taking ourselves too seriously, even though there's a great plot and journey to follow. And I found that it was just a great time to go on a journey that wasn't so high stakes among all the other epic and complex and crazy stories I read throughout the year. This is one that I felt was just like a nice little exhale and a good series just to take a breather from the heavy stuff. And this is another time where I'll recommend the audiobook. Some series are just a little bit maybe too dense or heavy to listen to on audio. Again, not the case here. I feel like the story is the perfect size and scope to fit into an audiobook. You really don't ever feel like you're going to be missing anything or not remembering names or civilizations or whatever. It's a perfect size story to fit into an audio experience. And again, great narrator. Definitely recommend the audio if you're looking at the series. And next, I want to talk about a few things that I didn't like, which there really wasn't a ton I hated or disliked, but there are definitely some cautionary things that you should just know because I think they are the things that the series will hinge on whether or not people will enjoy it or not. And for me, I think while the tower as a setting for the story is a strength, I can also see how sometimes the execution of it is a weakness. As I mentioned, you spend almost the entire story in the tower. You experience a lot of different ringdoms in each book, and the ringdoms are sort of like the stacked cities making their way up the tower. And I found that not every ringdom that is in there is as interesting as others. So sometimes a big chunk of the story you'll be stuck in a single ringdom with their people and those characters, and kind of every ringdom's different and unique, but they're not all as fun to listen to or read as others. So there are times where maybe you feel a little stuck in one of those, and you're kind of like, well, what else is going on in this tower? I want to see this that you're talking about, or this ringdom. And the story is taking its time and kind of sticking you in one place, and you kind of just have to ride it out. You're not maybe going to love every aspect of the tower itself. As a whole, it's a really cool setting. It's just a matter of liking every single part. I'm not sure every reader will. And as I mentioned earlier, this is a really strange and weird, odd story and world. And at first, I really wasn't sure I liked it. There's some really strange, very, very strange things, especially when you first are getting used to the series. And whether or not you can make it through is going to be up to the taste of the reader. I'm glad I powered through because some of the weird stuff you'll experience kind of later on feels less weird when you get more of a background on the tower and everything going on. But I could see just sort of the initial aspects of it being a turnoff to some. So whether or not you're going to be able to vibe with the weirdness just comes down to personal taste, but it's something I think should be mentioned when deciding if you'll read the series. And last but not least, if you're at all familiar with the series coming into this video, you might have heard that the final book, book 4, which is The Fall of Babel, has gotten a little bit of a reputation of being divisive. Some people, or really a lot of people, did not like it at all. It has a relatively low rating on Goodreads compared to the rest of the first 3 books. And I've seen it get completely trashed by some people who thought it was just an awful, terrible ending to an otherwise fairly promising series. And to give my spoiler-free opinion on the ending, I don't think it was perfect. I don't think it was great. I really do not think it was awful or terrible. And I do not think that it ruined the experience for me in any way. So take that as my cautionary advice. Don't not read this series, or at least try the series, because you've heard it's not the best ending. To me, this is a story that's mostly about the journey, I'd say. The journey is where you'll have the fun. The ending is good enough, in my opinion, to still make this a worthy series. Even though book 4 overall is probably my least favorite of the four, I would definitely say it's not something to take away from trying the series. And to wrap this up, I'd like to give my final take on the series and sort of summarize if it's maybe something you should give a try. So you can probably tell from how I'm describing it that overall I did enjoy the series. I would definitely say I liked it quite a bit. I wouldn't say it'll probably ever end up in like that top tier of my favorite series, but it's definitely one that I am glad I read and I don't regret at all. I think that this series can fill a pretty good niche in the modern fantasy genre in that, like I said, it's fairly low stakes, it's relatively low commitment at only 4 books, and it's lighthearted and fun, and everything's so serious in the fantasy genre sometimes. I think there needs to be more series like this where, something like Discworld, where you can get lost in a zany, strange world and not take yourself too seriously, but still get something really solid out of it. And that's where I think the Books of Babel really fit into the genre today. And all this hinges on whether or not you enjoy Bancroft's style. I think that this is the type of series where you'll know relatively soon whether or not it's for you. I would implore you to just try the first book, Senlin Ascends. And if you love it, you should absolutely continue. If you like it and you're not quite sure, probably you can still continue and see if it goes well for you. For me, I was not 100% sure about the first book, but it was enough that I continued on, and I'm glad I did. And lastly, I think that if you don't vibe with that first book, it's probably not worth continuing. I don't think that your overall feelings on the series will bode well if you don't like the first book. So it can really be a good way to take your temperature on whether or not it's going to work for you. And last but not least, if you're already into this style that I've described, this more zany, Discworld, funny sort of fantasy, you have to try the Books of Babel. It will probably work really well for you. I know, like I said, Alan from the Library of Alexandria, he was the first advocate that I knew of for the series, and he's a diehard Discworld fan, and it seems like he loves the Books of Babel nearly as much. So I think that's a good way to know if it might work for you, is that if you love Discworld or anything like it, definitely give the series a try. And that pretty much wraps it up. I really enjoyed taking on this quartet over the last few months, doing 1 book a month. It was really nice to have something more lighthearted in my normal TBRs. While it's not my favorite series, I am already sad to know it's over, and I really enjoyed my time with the characters and will miss them. And I'm really excited to see what else Josiah Bancroft has in store. I know that he has a new trilogy coming out called The Hexologists, and the Books of Babel more than sold me enough to continue reading his work. So that's it for today, everybody. I really hope that this series review gave you a better idea of whether or not this series might be something you want to try. And if maybe it's something you don't want to try, maybe I saved you the trouble and time that it would take to start the series. And so I hope that you enjoyed today's video. If you've stayed till the end, I really do appreciate you watching. If you have your own thoughts or questions about the series, feel free to drop down below and leave me a comment. Thank you again, everybody. Have a great day. Goodbye.